Hello there, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on pressing the reset button and nurturing positivity in young people. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon. It's great to have you with us. So my name is Tracy. I'm from Brainwaves, and I'm going to be your host for this afternoon. What we are hoping to do today is talk a little bit about the P, which represents positive emotion within the PERMA framework. Now, if you joined one of our previous webinars on positive psychology, we spoke with Dr. Michelle Tytherley about the general concept of positive psychology and how it can be applied in school situations. We had such a good response to that we are now able to start a whole new series of webinars, which will look at the individual elements within the acronym of PERMA. And of course, we're starting today with the letter P and positive emotion. So we're delighted today to be able to welcome Professor Ilona Boniwell, who is a world-leading academic and consultant in the field of positive psychology. Hi, Ilona.
Hello, Tracy. Hello, everybody.
It's wonderful to have Ilona here. She's currently Professor of Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology at the University of East London. She has served as the first chair of the European Network of Positive Psychology and vice chair of the International Positive Psychology Association. She has written 12 publications on positive psychology, and I'm just going to try and see if you can't. No, it's not. Oh, does that work? This is one of her books. It's terrible. It's not working. My apologies. Personal Wellbeing Lessons for Secondary Schools, Positive Psychology in Action for 11 to 14-year-olds. So that's one of Ilona's publications. And she's also the CEO of Positran, a boutique consultancy dedicated to achieving transformation through positive psychology. So again, thank you for joining us, Ilona. We're also very pleased to welcome to our discussion Gavin English. Hi, Gavin. Gavin is Deputy Head of Pastoral at Elaine School in London and also Chair of the Governing Body at Harris Academy in South Northwood. Gavin has particular interest in the application of positive education and was instrumental in Elaine's becoming one of the first schools that we recruited here at Brainwaves to become one of our research school partners. So it's brilliant to have us with us today. Thanks, Gavin. And last but not least, we have the wonderful Julian Turner, Director of Education of the Education Programme here at Brainwaves and Chair of the Day. Hi, Julian.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So just a very quick overview of how today will run. We've got about 30 minutes of conversation with our panelists, during which time we'd welcome you to join in the chat. I can see that's already being used ever a lot. So you can do that by the speech bubble icon. The thing to remember is to share your comments with everyone so we can all see them rather than just the hosts and panelists. At the end of that 30 minutes, we're going to have hopefully about 10 to 15 minutes for you to ask any questions. And you can do this at any stage during the webinar. You can do that through the Q&A button. Just click on that, type in your question, and we'll try and get through some questions at the end. Now, before we get started, very quickly, we're going to launch a poll and just see how familiar you all might be with this concept of positive psychology. So you should be seeing that on your screen now. There it is. Amazing. And so that's a very quick and dirty poll just to see if you're very familiar, quite familiar, or not familiar at all. No worries, nobody is recording any of this information, so and it's not allocated to you, so don't worry about that. I can see about 75% of you have voted, so just give you a couple of more seconds to vote. Amazing, nearly there. Okay, Tara, I think we'll end the vote there and see what the results are. So 10% of you are very familiar. That's interesting, helpful to know. Half of you are quite familiar and just about under 40% not familiar at all. So this is obviously going to be hopefully an interesting webinar for us all, but particularly for some of you who have not really encountered this concept before. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that, for taking part in that. And I think we're going to kick it all off. Just by asking Ilona to briefly explain what the P within PERMA means in terms of positive emotion and what it sort of looks like in practice. Is that okay, Ilona? I'll hand over to you.
Absolutely. So in Martin Seligman framework, PERMA, which is basically the whole framework defining well-being kind of in relatively simple terms, positive emotions are really the emotions which are pleasant to experience. So P is basically positive emotions. Sometimes we say it's pleasure, but mainly referring to positive emotions, kind of pleasant to experience. So the type of emotions such as like joy, gratitude, serenity, hope, pride, inspiration, or love being perhaps the most complex out of these emotions, but everything basically that it's related to those pleasant feelings, pleasant experiences. And of course, kind of going a little bit beyond Martin Seligman's framework, positive emotions are really in the heart of what we understand to be well-being, because well-being, when we say what's well-being, what's happiness, we really talk about the kind of the cognitive part. What do we think about our lives? And the emotional part. An emotional part is basically how do we feel about our lives? And what we want is to have more of those positive emotions than negative emotions, not necessarily saying that we don't need negative emotions. We absolutely do as well, because they're very important indicators of our emotional states. But what we want to have more of those positive emotions. And that's basically what P is referring to.
Fantastic, thank you. So one of the things that we liked at Brainwaves that is really strong within our approach of the work we do is to be scientifically correct and to know that there's lots of evidence behind the ideas and the strategies that we're putting out for young people to take part in. How strong is the evidence behind the idea that positive emotions and attitudes can impact our well-being?
Well, again, positive emotions are really fundamentally the core of well-being, of what we know well-being to be. And the evidence behind them is very, very strong. If you are curious or interested to kind of find out about the research behind, please look into the theory, which is called broaden and build theory of positive emotions by Barbara Fredrickson. And what she's basically saying, what the theory is saying, and we're talking now hundreds, if not thousands of papers, is that positive emotions expand our focus and allow us to notice more things. They help us to be kind of more inclusive, more open-minded, more sort of broad in the way we think about the world. At the same time, the build part of the model of the theory refers to the fact that positive emotions enable us to build resources. We're talking here about emotional resources, social resources, cognitive resources, and basically they really have a very, very important role to play. And also the theory would highlight the fact that positive emotions enable us to become more resilient overall in lives. And so they really play a very important element in how we bounce back from difficulties and adversities. And then there is lots and lots of research basically showing how positive emotions contribute to cognitive functioning, to learning and memory, to our health, physical health, mental health. And I would say over the past 20, 25 years, positive psychology has really learned enormously about the role of positive emotions and how they influence our functioning overall.
Can you just repeat the theory that you said it was built upon? Was it broad and build?
Broaden and build theory.
Okay.
Broaden and build. So this is the theory of Barbara Fredrickson, and you would find a lot of research on the corresponding website because she's one of the major theorists and scholars in positive psychology. So if you just type broaden and build theory, you would have the whole lab, and there's lots and lots of basically hundreds and thousands of publications. So if you want to find out a little bit more about that.
Amazing, thank you. And in terms of the evidence behind this with young people specifically, has there been much in research along those lines?
Well, actually, let's start with the fact that when we do research, who do we do research with? And usually, kind of frankly speaking, most of research is done with university students. So that not necessarily the 11 years olds, but university students, kind of 17, 18 years olds. Usually, these are the people whom we studied the most. I would say 90% kind of, it's a very random number here, but probably about 90% of psychology research is done with young people. So absolutely, there is a lot of evidence, because lots of evidence coming from this age group. But of course, not just specifically looking at the university students, there is a lot of research done with young people as well. And yes, we do know that in young people, the experience of positive emotions, or when they try to intervene to increase positive emotions, is associated with very important outcomes, including academic outcomes, including actually better scores, for example, on different standardized tests, including, of course, health outcomes, sort of social well-being outcomes, resilience, motivation, goal achievement. So there is a lot of literature basically saying that, yes, when young people experience positive emotions, there are lots of different positive outcomes coming out of that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ilona. But Gavin, let's just bring this in, you into the conversation then. And maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about your work at Elaine's and how you are using the PERMA framework within a lot of the pastoral side of your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously there's a huge amount of research behind this that kind of backs up probably quite a lot of common sense in terms of what's going on in schools and how we're using this stuff. And actually, in my opinion, what's really good about the whole PERMA framework is that actually a lot of this stuff is going on in schools, and it's fundamentally about shifting a lens a little bit in terms of how students perceive, particularly the things that are giving them positive emotion. For us, it's been a really positive thing to enable students to actually kind of move up their scale of value and their importance, these things that they do that make them feel good, you know, the things that bring them joy, the things that bring them together with other people, the things that they know are important to them in terms of making them, you know, feel great about their engagement and their relationships with other people. It's just about making that more of a priority for them. So, you know, all children and staff, actually, teachers, have pinch points during their school week or over the course of the term. By holding up this stuff in a slightly different light, by getting children to recognise that these things are important for their well-being, for their mental health, for their stability, for their flourishing in the school environment, we enable them to place greater importance on them so that when the going gets tough, these are not the things they leave behind them. If anything, they focus on those things more. They try and do more of those things to enable them to kind of pick up those more challenging aspects of whatever it is that is going on. You know, some of which are really functional. It might just be a time when you've got an awful lot of homework stacked up. You know, don't not do the thing that makes you feel good. Don't leave that behind or park that because you've got to do the thing that you've got to catch up on. Recognize that that is an enabler to you taking up that challenge and doing the stuff that you need to do. And that whole PERMA framework just lends itself to that really fundamentally. You know, do the things that make you feel good and make you happy. Find something that you really, really engage with and you plug into. We all know that when kids have that, you know, that thing that really matters to them that they can hold close to them, particularly if it's associated with school, that's big for their engagement with the school community. Check in on your relationships on a regular basis and find a way to contribute really positively to a community. And then, you know, get as many high fives and feel good about the stuff that you achieve as you possibly can over the course of your time at the school. And we use that model actually at the start of all of our pastoral conversations. You know, what you're doing that's fun, what, you know, what's bringing you joy, what's making you smile, what's making you laugh. Have you got something that you're really into? And if you have, like, how do we facilitate that for you? You know, what are your relationships like? Are they serving you properly? And how are you contributing? You know, do you feel like you're contributing? And actually, maybe that's for us to hold up to you. We think you bring value to the school community like this, or to your wider community. In fact, is there something there? So, you know, it is very, very applicable. And of course, the research behind it, which actually is fascinating and does demonstrate, you know, almost hockey stick curve in terms of like the impact that it can have on young people if it lands in the right way, is fascinating. But actually, the really good thing about this is that I think there was a huge amount of practice around this happening in schools, and it's just about, as I said before, shifting the lens a little bit in terms of the students and actually maybe the staff, and just recognising that these things serve the children in even more of a significant way than maybe we realised, you know?
That's great. Thanks, Gavin. It'd be great if anybody is sort of doing like Gavin, having lots of using PERMA specifically, or just positive education already. If you want to tell us about that in the chat, that would be wonderful to see. In the meantime, I'm just going to bring in Julian to just carry on from Gavin's points about how they use PERMA to talk about how we've used it within the development of the Brainwaves curriculum. And whilst Julian just prepares for that question, I'll just give a quick outline that we have been working to develop a series of free lessons for young people aged 11 to 18. We're developing them at Key Stage 3, 4 and 5. They're very, very much underpinned by the positive psychology. And they'll be free from our website from January. We're launching them. There's some Key Stage 5 ones available already, and we're launching more Key Stage 3 and 4 in January. So, Julian, can I just, maybe if you could just expand a bit more about the lessons that we've been working on and why positive psychology is so important to that approach.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we had a number of different starting points for thinking about the lessons that we were doing. First of all, we spent a lot of time, I mean, actually, Tracy spent a lot of time in schools talking to young people about what mattered to them, what the things were that they felt they were concerned about, trying to encourage them to talk openly about their well-being. And of course, a lot of what they said was related to perceived negatives, were related to sort of, conditions or things they worried about or things they worried their friends were suffering from. And so you end up with a very long list of kind of things to worry about and anxieties, all of which, which is very important. But at the same time, we were concerned about the educational, if we started at that point and talked about conditions, that we would end up actually not helping the situation. And talking to the psychiatrists at Oxford University that we've been working with, that very much backed up that concern. So layered on top of what the young people were interested in hearing about, there were also a number of strategies that they were using in working with young people, which had very strong evidence behind them. Just simple things that young people could do to give themselves a little bit more agency in managing their mental health. And so we had a number of those things. There are things based around sleep, for example. There are things based around how people talk to each other, as well as things around relating to understanding, building a better scientific understanding of what's happening in your brain around this time. So that was the second starting point, those sorts of strategies. And then what was fantastic about the getting really into positive psychology was that the PERMA framework provided a kind of an organizing framework for a lot of these strategies and ideas. And there is as Gavin said, there is an awful lot of overlap between good work that is being done by experienced professionals with young people in schools and in other contexts as well, and the positive psychology framework, and indeed the other frameworks as well. So there's a lot of overlap in all this thing, and part of it actually was clearing away some of the confusion and trying to simplify to get down to a number of lessons that teachers could pick up off the shelf and deliver relatively easily. So that was what sort of lay behind it. But can I chip in with a question to
of course.
Ilona and to Gavin? So I'm interested, Ilona, in that when Ofsted come knocking at schools' door, and schools have to be extremely interested in the relationship between anything they do, any resource they spend, and outcomes for young people. Obviously, primarily academic outcomes, but also health outcomes as well. And I was interested to know what your experience was of looking at the relationship between well-being, positive emotion, and academic outcomes for young people. Does it help? That's the question.
I remember this very question was asked, I think sometime in 2007, which was when I actually started working on well-being of young people with the Haberdashers Academies at the time, where we developed a really comprehensive curriculum for well-being. And yes, at that point, actually, it was more hypothetical, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
We were guessing that the well-being, basically investment in well-being, would translate into academic outcomes. Nowadays, it's no longer sort of hypothetical, because obviously research did kind of allow us to suggest that it's associated with better cognitive functioning, it's with better memory, etc. Nowadays it's no longer hypothetical. We actually have studies where showing when we're implementing well-being curricula, we are enhancing, for example, positive emotions, and there are specific studies, tricky, not so many of them, but we have specific studies actually saying that when we teach these skills, that does translate to better academic outcomes. Difficulty, of course, being is when you're doing this type of studies, you really need to be able to match the well-being data with academic outcome data. So you are really well into kind of the ethics nightmare trying to get the studies approved. So that's why you don't have many more of those studies. But yes, you do have studies that of quite large scale now showing that yes, they do translate to academic outcomes. So we can be pretty safe in investing into well-being and positive emotions, of course. Yeah.
Can I bring this right into the weeds?
Go on then.
You mentioned the Ofsted word, Julian. Like,
I'm sorry.
So a really fundamental thing that everyone's got their eyes on at the moment, right, around attendance. You know, the fracturing of that, you know, that social norm where children came to school and did what they were supposed to do 5 days a week at least. So you know, that piece around attendance and school avoidance is a really interesting piece of work, and we are finding that if you you know, I don't want to be reductive about this, but if you can find the thing that gets those, someone's just commented, dropping the O bomb. That is funny. But you know, there is a risk, right, that when Ofsted come in, suddenly things around pupil well-being kind of get lost in the melee, right? Okay, and data like attendance figures and numbers can become a driver for that. Whereas actually, we know, don't we, as practitioners, that positive student well-being and engagement is going to drive attendance numbers up, and you can have a virtuous circle instead of a vicious one. But, you know, thinking about that student experience at the start of the day, the child that you need to get in, thinking about what makes them tick and gets them going, and presenting them with positive emotion, which is the thing that is driving them to getting into school, because we know that these children want to be in school, right? You know, it's not, you know, some of these children will really struggle with this and maybe they don't want to be there, but there'll be something that will get them in, whether it's a football under the arm or art sessions in the morning or some sort of physical activity that gets them going. There's opportunities to plug that stuff in. There's a really directed, targeted measure to engage with specific children, the thing that is going to get them up and at them, you know. And I'm not saying that isn't necessarily an easy thing to do within the structure of a school day, but it is a really straightforward, practical application. You know, there is a huge place for this in terms of the arts, in terms of physical activity within schools, in terms of creative journaling is a really interesting piece of work that I've seen done brilliantly with a really wide range of children. You know, opportunities to start the day with those sort of activities that set children up and are the reason that they're going to cross that threshold can be a really powerful thing. And all of those things fundamentally link to that positive emotion, to the triggering of those positive emotions in children. And, you know, so, you know, without trying to spin the O word, the O bomb too much, you can absolutely see how this implemented over a period of time will drive data and numbers that Ofsted are concerned with, hopefully less so as we progress, but, you know, are at the moment concerned with. And, you know, we do want children in school. And this maybe is a really good way of addressing that school avoidance challenge that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Gavin. Yeah, sorry, Julian.
You know, no, I was going to say we're having. So I'm with another hat on. I'm a director of Camden Learning, which is Camden Schools, schools-led partnership for improvements, and it is a major issue. And Ruth mentions in the text that it's also an issue at their schools is going to be a very, very good theme, and has asked what are the specific strategies, or can you give an example of a specific strategy that you found that has really helped with school refusers that using positive emotion?
Oh, okay, so low-key opening activities for the school day. So students knowing this, just in fact, I had a conversation with one of our EWOs about this earlier on. So this is about a low-key opener to the day for children. That hustle and bustle moment can be pretty hectic. If they know they're coming into a calm environment with a finite activity that they engage with, and you know what, I'm not being reductive when I say this, but a game of exploding kittens that they know they're coming into every morning is a really good opener. And so those activities and those things plugged in that they know they're arriving at, you know, with a biscuit and a juice and a conversation that sets them up, rather than maybe the initial challenge of walking into a form room, always with a view to progressing them back towards, you know, always with a view to progress and enabling engagement with a fuller school experience, like a fuller, more straightforward school experience in mind. But opening up activities like that is really important. Art is a really interesting piece. If you've got students that school avoiding but are passionate about their art, there is a difference between them having a space and a time to do their own creative work and the work that they are doing as part of their academic study. So thinking about how we get that stuff going is really important. Someone's just commented art was cut in my school. You know what? Like across creatives, that is a real challenge for us all, like to front up, to take on. But that doesn't mean that art can't happen, and it doesn't mean that art can't be facilitated for children in that space. In a narrow, same thing, in a narrowing curriculum, that's really interesting. Music is another one. Okay, some of the best work I've seen around this, and it's not at my school, so I can't take credit for this, although we might nick the idea. Some of the best work I've seen around school avoidance has been sessions in the morning with low-key, accessible music, buy a couple of guitars, campfire guitar, whatever that is, learn 5 or 6 different chords, and have that moment at the start of the morning for kids that are into their music, but maybe can't engage with it in school because the curriculum is narrowed, which it shouldn't. But, you know, thinking about that, that's some of the best work I've seen done. So, I will always push against the narrowing curriculum. I think broader education is what we're all about, right? So, fundamentally anyone in education should know that. But there's a place for this work. Like there's a place for this stuff in schools. It can land with them in different spaces and in different places. And if you're talking about children who need that support, positive experience through those sort of activities is, for me, that's a really important thing. That's a magic moment potentially there.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Gavin. Leading on from that, Ilona, have you got any sort of specific strategies that you would sort of suggest for encouraging young people to develop more positive emotion?
Absolutely. I think what is really important when we think about this type of sort of approaches, positive education approaches, is to think from kind of this triangular basis, because we can't, curricula is very important. I spent my life developing positive psychology curricula, but we really need to think about whole school approaches plus curricula, so specific lessons, plus much more toolkit-based approaches for teachers. And so if you really want to be successful, we need to approach it from this sort of broad 3 perspectives. So when we think about whole school approach to well-being, whole school approach to positive emotions, we need to think about the rituals. What are the rituals? What are the greeting rituals? What are the ending rituals? What is display rituals that we have? Do we have the what went well wall, for example, somewhere out there? Do we have the whole overarching strategy, integrating the teacher well-being with children's well-being, bringing parents onto this well-being conversation and journey? So it needs to be positioned strategically. So it's very difficult, for example, for teachers to own the concept of well-being, of positive emotions, if they don't feel this is reflected in their organizational strategy, if, for example, the leadership practices are not up to scratch and don't emphasize and encourage their own well-being. So this is kind of the basic level, the whole school well-being approach that needs to be thought strategically about. And of course, this is also taking into account that we also need to emphasize and celebrate what there is already, because sometimes schools very much often start saying, oh, what do we do? Perhaps they already have enormous amount of things going on, but it's about bringing it together. So the second level is a curricular approach. So we're talking about the lessons, we're talking well-developed lessons. And here's again, kind of couple of considerations. Obviously, there are lots of different curricula needs to be basically evidence-based in terms of theoretical basis of the exercises, but also we need to be constantly updating and upgrading. So for example, that book you showed with balloons, which didn't quite come on the screen, personal well-being lessons. This is one of my earliest curriculum design many years back. We've now updated it based much more on the gamification approaches, because frankly speaking, when we are running a well-being lesson, let's say, we're competing for attention, for engagement. We're competing with everything kids are doing at home. And guess what? What are they doing at home? Gaming, social media. Well, so question is not only the contents of this curricula, but also how we present them. It's not only theoretical kind of exercise, let's now write gratitude cards, for example, for one another, but it's also how do we present it in such a way that it's interesting, engaging, and fundamentally kind of utilizes all this information we can learn from gamification and translate it into something that's stickable, interesting. So we use fun activities in this type of curricula. We use Lego Serious Play when we actually, for example, respond to a question, what makes you feel happy, for example, or what brings you positive emotion. We integrate the physical movement when we try to explore, for example, emotions and do exercise on emotion in the classroom. I would usually or often do a big strategy. It's kind of draw a well-being quadrant and get children to understand differences between different types of emotions, get them to stand there, to express themselves, to move about, to actually generate different exercises that they need, etc. So it's also about kind of how do we run this type of curricula. And then finally, and I think it's probably the most important part, is that we can't just leave well-being to either whole school rituals or to curricula. Well-being is something that's practiced every minute, almost every day. Can we practice on every lesson? So at the moment, what I'm really excited about is kind of building and developing well-being type of toolkits. So I already have one kind of more for adults called positive action cards, which is kind of all positive psychology interventions brought together. But we are currently building with one of my PhD students a very specific toolkit for well-being for school children, based completely on all the different validated positive psychology interventions, but then translating them into the school environment. So for example, when your kids are feeling sluggish, you kind of get them up and down, you kind of do sneaky squats, basically. There we go, you have 1 minute. How many squats can you complete in 1 minute? There is a competition, they're going to be very engaged, they're going to laugh, and they're going to be much more attentive afterwards, for example. So these type of simple things, really simple things you can integrate into a lesson. Then you have 1 minute, you have 2 minutes. We need to actually get children, for example, or young people more focused. Well, let's do a tiny little mindfulness exercise without necessarily calling it such, but actually really focusing their attention. Or let's say, for example, just opening their awareness and say, okay, just for 1 minute, just try to be aware of everything you can see. Count everything you can see about you. Things like this. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop here, but I think you get the idea, right?
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Gavin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
You know what I was going to say that is really important, I'm as guilty of this as anyone, right? But it is about practicing what you preach, isn't it, as well? Like, if we can model that, I think, there'll be people on this call that are like thinking, yeah, great for the kids, who are absolutely giving up on the thing that makes them feel good, or the thing that they get their rush off, the things that make them feel positive about the world and that bring them all the things we've talked about, because they've got to stack a mark into blitz, or because they're just up against it, or they're feeling that pressure. So you know what, that is about, I suppose, all of us as educators, like trying to find our priority and hoping that the powers that be help us out a little bit about that. But certainly, if we're talking about things for school leaders to think about in terms of well-being, maybe it isn't the compulsory yoga class. Like, maybe it isn't that, because that isn't making me tick. Maybe it's about asking that question of people: what is it that makes you feel good? What is it that you're doing? Like, where are you getting your positive emotion? That question in and of itself, I think, is pretty punchy. I I think that's worth thinking about maybe.
And just
Ilona,
oh, sorry, Gillian.
sorry, I was going to quickly jump in. Ilona, can I ask you something about this is a question that I quite often get asked when talking about positive emotion, is but adults and children, it's about the process whereby people are able to deepen their positive emotion, because some people come at it thinking, well, it's okay for you, you're a positive person, but this person here, they're not a very positive person. There's some people feel it's something within them. Some people feel that it's something that has to be discovered, that may be in them, but it has to be uncovered, or it may be hidden. Some people feel that it's something that has to be learned or applied or developed or practiced. How do you describe the different processes that people and young people can go through in terms for developing positive emotion?
Was it to me or to Gavin?
To you.
Yeah. So, well, I think, we all have positive emotions. There isn't anybody who doesn't experience positive emotions. So to start with, it's very often about recognizing what they are, first of all. And in any case, when we're building this emotional capacity, the starting point is the identification of the emotions and the kind of even categorizing them, even being able to name them, etc. So the research is very clear on the fact that it's very difficult to develop something or to counteract something or to manage something that you're not even aware exists. So actually the very first starting point when we are developing positive emotions is actually, first of all, just noticing what emotions we have. We used to have this very simple exercise with young people. We used to get them to wear little bands, kind of, little sort of green-orange bands. And we would give them 2 little bands, like a green and a red one. And we basically say, every time you feel an emotion, if it's a positive emotion, click your orange or your green band. And every time it's a negative emotion, click your basically a red band. So just kind of as a noticing part, because what we do know from research is when people are able to notice the emotion and name the emotion, that really helps enormously with emotion regulation. So basically this is a starting point, is noticing. And from there on, kind of going into building of positive emotions, what's also very important to realize that positive emotions are not all the same. And sometimes we're saying, okay, I'm not a positive person. I'm not kind of the jumpy, enthusiastic person, for example. Well, there are positive emotions which are related to joy, enthusiasm, kind of jumping up and down. But also there are emotions which are much kind of calmer emotions, basically. So contentment, for example, is one of those calm, positive emotions. And very often when we think positive emotions, we kind of go for these high activation emotions rather than calming ones, which are in fact very durable, much more stable, and much more important to develop. So there will be different processes related to building those active ones and those more calming positive emotions. And here, for example, yes, mindfulness can help. And if you're sort of petrified of mindfulness, by the way, don't worry. There are many, many videos that do it for you on different exercises. But also sometimes we are kind of a little bit biased, thinking that in order to develop mindfulness, we kind of need to sit down, close eyes, and meditate. There are tons of different exercises to develop mindfulness. Sometimes getting, for example, your young people up and getting them just to walk around the classroom for a couple of minutes, just feeling all sensations in their bodies. That could be perfectly a great, basically, mindfulness exercise. So hopefully I started answering a little bit of the questions that you asked, Julian.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just actually I'm going to put in the chat, there is the virtues and action survey, which is quite good tool for helping to kind of identify positive characteristics and positive emotions for young people. Just to
that would help with engagement.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, is of actually being able to describe something before you can really experience it.
Yeah, that's really important. Can I just chip in as well? It's really important that that there's agency in student wellbeing. Like, it has to be theirs, right? So exactly as Ilona's saying, presenting to children that their well-being and their positive emotion can come from different things. We all have that experience, but that might come differently. So, framing that as in for you, that might be loud music jumping on your bed. For someone else, that might be that quiet moment, on the sofa with the cat. Like whatever that looks like is theirs and is, they have that agency and that ownership themselves. That's really, really important, because it's definitely not a one size fits all. I love that reference to mindfulness, Ilona. I thought that was for me. When that first came out, I was like, oh, jackpot. And I thought that was for me. And then someone told me I had to sit really still and be quiet. And I was like, oh, maybe not. So, it's really interesting, I think.
Sit for 1 minute doing nothing can be mindfulness exercise, by the way.
yeah, quite. With a good tune on and a cup of coffee looking out a window, that works, definitely.
So we're coming into the last 5 minutes, but there's a question in the Q&A about neurodiversity and how that could be factored into the concept of happiness and joy. Ilona, have you got any views on this in terms of it being considered rather than it being led by the sort of the predominant neurotype being seen as the norm?
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, there is actually a lot of work in positive psychology at the moment happening on how to integrate basically what we know with different approaches to neurodiversity. And I think kind of the starting point, okay, such a difficult, by the way, question to comment on, because
sure.
neurodiversity is so huge, in fact, when we go into specifics. But one of it is, first of all, trying to reinterpret basically different mental capacities is fundamentally strengths, and very much working from a strengths perspective with different learners. For example, the same attention difficulty, hyperactivity, if we reinterpret it as a strength, as a capacity for very often, especially, let's say, hyperactivity, for unlimited energy, and we look at the positive characteristics of a particular population, we can actually get very, very far. But then, of course, the difficulty with neurodiversity is that my answer would need to be neurodiverse in order to actually be something meaningful. So I would just, encourage to look into the current literature and lots of things which are currently coming out as strategies.
But that is, and it isn't a one size fits all at all. Exactly right. Diversity is diversity, right? But student ownership of that piece, and absolutely, Ilona, I agree, reframing their perception of their strength, making sure they understand that is a strength, and then thinking about how they experience positive emotion through that is really important. And that is why we must be very careful not to try and apply a perception of what is positive emotion for some people, to everybody, because, there was a little while, wasn't there, when everyone across schools of the country had children sitting very still for 5 minutes at the start of every school day. And I can tell you, if I'd have been at school and 14 at that time, if I hadn't been out loud, my brain would have been screaming. So it's really important that the students have ownership and agency around this stuff, and that we listen to them and we hear what they're saying.
And we do have research nowadays saying, absolutely, I so agree with you, Gavin, that basically if we choose our specific selections of, let's say, interventions which are appropriate for us, we have much higher autonomy, and we basically have much more higher appropriation of these concepts, and we would do them in a much more likely fashion. So yes, absolutely important, this diversification and personalization and the personal choice as well.
Fantastic. And I think that's a great place to wrap up the conversation for today. I can see from the chat there's been an amazing conversation around homework, which I hope that's been really useful for you. Just, we haven't talked about it specifically, but within the chat, I think that's been really helpful. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it's been a very positive webinar. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. We're just going to launch a quick poll to see if you have any views now about whether there's anything within the webinar that's motivated you to introduce more positive psychology into your school. So we're giving you a couple of options there. If you'd like to take part in that, thank you very much for your comments. Tara, could you put a link to to our website so people could take a look at the lessons that we've got developing? That would be fantastic. And well, thank you to all our speakers. I know Gavin's got to dash off. It's amazing to hear your contributions today. Very, very helpful. Thank you so much for that. And if we just share the results now. So 63% think that yes, you will introduce more positive psychology. Nobody saying that they won't introduce it more, which is wonderful. And then a few more was just like, right, we need to find out a bit more. So that's absolutely fun. That's wonderful to hear too. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful. Thank you, Ilona. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Julian. And we hopefully see you at another Brainwaves webinar very soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye.